Thank you. So welcome to the joint 5th Urban Economy Forum and the 59th ISOCARP World Planning Virtual Pre-Congress. I'm Dr. Tijana Tufek Memisevic. I'm an architect, sustainable urban development specialist, a visiting lecturer at the Krakow University of Technology, and a member of the ISOCARP Scientific Committee. It is my pleasure to greet you all as moderator for today's session, which is titled The Future of Planning, the Platforms, Technologies, and Methodologies for the Evolution of the Planning Practice. I'm joined by my co-host, Julio Carrillo, who's a senior planner at Parkhill and director of the Planning 2050 initiative. So just to give you a brief overview, our session is poised to explore the intersection of technology, methodologies, and urban planning, offering insights about the processes that shape the future of our cities and communities. And the context of this session is significant because planners worldwide are recognizing these interconnectedness of systems as the future of planning practice relies on integrating diverse databases and dimensions to provide practical solutions. Our panelists today will delve into how technologies and different methodologies play a pivotal role in enhancing urban planning while addressing the interdependencies between these various systems. In the context of large metropolitan areas, understanding these connections is essential for achieving long-term planning success. Our session aims to provide a platform for a fruitful discussion, incorporating data analysis and insights from researchers and academics from different parts of the world. So without further ado, I will now introduce our esteemed panelists, starting with ladies first. Dr. Wafa Al-Daili is a senior urban planner and lead at the International Metropolitan Fellowship Arabia Chapter. We have with us today Ed Parham, architect and director of Space Syntax, and also Mark Roland de Castro, who is president of NParksys and lead at the IMF Austronesia Chapter. And last but not least, Professor Piyush Girgaonkar, head of the Urban Affairs and SDGs and lead at the IMF India Chapter. So dear panelists, I extend a warm welcome to you all. And I will kindly ask you to be mindful of the 7 minutes dedicated for each presentation so we can have an insightful discussion afterwards. We also encourage active participation and questions from the attendees, and we will monitor the questions in the chat box, pose them to our panelists after the presentation and after the moderator's Q&A. I will also kindly ask everyone who is not presenting to mute their microphones, and please note that the session will be recorded. So thank you all, and let's start. Ed, good to have you here with us. The floor is yours, and please, 7 minutes. Thank you.
Sorry, I missed, was that me first? Sorry,
Yes,
cut out just at the exact wrong moment.
No problem at all. Take your time. Yeah.
Here we go. That's hopefully sharing. Is that coming through? Yeah.
Yes, perfect.
Great. Okay. Well, I'll start my timer and I'll try and do it in 7 minutes. So I'm going to talk about cities as complex systems, how understanding them better. We don't just need technology and data, but what we really need is a framework that starts to explain outcomes, how they relate to systems, but to use that framework to structure the data that we have as well. And this isn't just about technical knowledge. I think it's as much about domain knowledge and how the two things go together. So the starting point is talking about cities as a complex system. And complex systems, I think probably people are really aware of them and they get talked about a lot, but a complex system is made up of parts or subsystems. These subsystems interact with each other. They create emergent effects, which sometimes seem unplanned or they seem to happen by themselves. And these effects can create feedback loops. Now in a city, this gets complicated because as a planner or a designer, you can change some of these systems. You might be able to change the street layout, land use, the density, the public transport. But there's also a whole load of things that you can't control. You can't change socioeconomic conditions or demographic factors or anything like that. So it's really difficult to intervene in. And if we want to be able to shape cities to have a positive impact and to create positive outcomes, we need to really understand how the things that we can control or the things that we can have influence, direct influence over, affect these outcomes. Now, just to give a really quick example of an emergent effect, we can talk about things like where is busy at what time of the day. This is a photo of London Bridge in London. You can see in the background, the opposite side of the pavement on the other side of the bridge is almost empty. Everybody's on this side of the bridge. Everybody's moving in the same direction. And the reason for that is because it's part of a bigger network of things. There's a bigger set of systems around it. There's a really busy station just off to the picture here. And behind the camera, it's got the highest concentration of employment in the country. So you get lots of people coming to the station, crossing the bridge. This side of the pavement is on the shortest, most direct route from the station to all the jobs. What becomes really interesting, this is London Bridge 40 years ago. It might even be more than that. Same thing is happening there. You can see all of the people are walking on the same side of the bridge. Even though some of the conditions have changed, there's now a cycle route, it's segregated, the public realm has changed. But because those bigger elements of the system haven't changed, yes, we're still seeing the same pattern. So it's really interesting that the big things which are influential might be outside of the area that you're looking at. Now, to make cities even more difficult, we can see that some of these systems that we can affect have impacts over time. And so the subsystems and systems are all changing at different rates. So you might see activities changing over minutes. You might see economic conditions changing over months, governments changing over years, buildings over decades. Things like streets and infrastructure, streets in particular, tend to change really slowly over centuries. Now, what we really need to do is understand how each of these start to fit together and how the things that we've got control over impact long-term outcomes. And to do that, we need to have this framework. So we need a framework to really think about outcomes, but also what would be great is if we can use it to position data. Now, what I'm going to do is use health as an example. Health outcomes are horrible because they're so complex. This is a complex system map of obesity. At the center, it shows that people become overweight and obese because they're not using up enough calories every day. There's loads of things that affect this. It might be age, it might be income, the food people eat. But one of the bits that is on here is the physical activity environment. So what that begins to be really interesting or helpful for is to say that the built environment that people live in can allow them to be active. Now, because it's complex, you can't guarantee, if you design the physical environment perfectly, you can't guarantee that people will be active and they won't be obese, but you can make it possible. And that's really important. You can make things possible, but you can't guarantee it. So we've got this framework. We can start to see the built environment starts to have an effect on people's daily behavior in terms of the way that they move around and how active they are. We know that has effects on health outcomes, on the individual, that has secondary impacts on society. What becomes then really important is to describe the built environment systems that we have some control over, to consistently describe their configuration and how they fit together, to understand how they influence this chain of activity and outcomes. So what I'm going to do is start to show we can use that same framework to understand how the built environment makes things possible. We can layer on systems like public transport. They might overcome some of the constraints of the built environment, but they might introduce their own constraints. It creates perceptions, which encourages people to do things or not. You have people's daily activity and the long-term outcomes that I mentioned earlier. Now, if we want to use this to think about what we can do as planners and designers, we can start to think about how to use this as data. Now, if you think of this in a really simple science experiment, you've got a set of variables, and these are the things that you can change. You've also got a set of results, and that's the daily activity and the behaviors that happen and the long-term impacts. Now we can start to use this to take data and layer it onto that framework. So there's lots and lots of data. Often there's big data, it might be live, it might come from sensors, from GPS, from mobile devices. And all of that data is really showing you what's happening where and when. But it's not talking about the systems. It's only showing you this picture of what's actually happening. Now, if you haven't got the system data, you can't understand why it happens. And this is why the slow data on the street networks, the infrastructure systems is so important, because the configuration of these big systems that we can change is really influential in where these patterns of activity and behavior happen. So once we have that framework, we can then start to use technology to better explain and better describe the particular characteristics of the built environment that are in place, where those activities and behaviors happen, and where they're associated with positive outcomes. Now, I've got 30 seconds left, and I've just got time, I think, to go through the summary, which is really to say, cities are really complex. There's lots of parts. they interact with each other, they affect daily activities, and those daily activities contribute to long-term outcomes, whether that's health or climate change and emissions. Planners and designers, we can influence some of these systems, but we can't guarantee a positive outcome. We can only make an outcome possible because it's part of a complex system. There's lots and lots of data available in cities, and there's more and more of it. We might not need all of it. Some might be more useful than others. We can use this framework to think about the built environment activities and outcomes as a way to position data about whether it's on a system, an activity, or an outcome. And then the real power of new technology is to better understand the relationships between the way that we configure these systems and the activities that occur over time. Then we can start to learn how to better design places. And that seemed to go very fast, and I will now hand back.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ed, for being so mindful with the time, but we will circle back on some of the issues that we presented during our discussion session. So let's move on. Julio, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tijana. Hope you're all able to see my screen.
Yes.
So I'm here to present and introduce what Planning 2050 is an initiative that started in early 2022. And I don't know how familiar, especially this audience that is more international, how familiar you guys are with Architecture 2030, which is a US-based initiative as well. And so Planning 2050 got inspired by Architecture 2030, which is basically a commitment, a voluntary commitment by architects in the US, signing to say, all my buildings are going to be net zero by 2030, right? A very aspirational thing that they want intentionally start transforming their own practice, their architectural practice. And so in 2022, I said, like, you know, the architects are already doing this with their buildings, the built environment. We as planners can really, you know, take a lot more action as well. And similar to that, we can start making commitments to transform planning practice. And we started with that idea, we evolved, and we came up with these three big aspirational goals for Planning 2050. The first one, as I said, you know, very inspired by Architecture 2030, we said we want to transform planning practice. And we want to transform these big hot topics that every single planner, every single urban designer is hearing about, you know, social equity, resilience aspects, and climate change. That might be our focus between 2025 and 2050. We might need to shift once we're getting closer to 2030 or 2050. But, you know, that's the first main aspirational goal for Planning 2050. The second goal, which is very related, very relevant to this topic that we're talking today, is all about how do we accelerate urban planners and urban designers to utilize data analysis in urban and community planning. Space Index is a great example of how we can do that, how we relate to health outcomes and things like that. And we can adapt more rapidly if we start using data-driven conditions, not only at the short term, but also at the long term. And so that's the second goal for Planning 2050. And the third one, which is also very relevant, especially in the US planning practice, which is still in its infancy, to really intentionally align UN SDGs to the planning practice in the country. So the American Planning Association, which is a partner of the Planning 2050 initiative within the Sustainable Development Communities Division, they really love this idea of linking UN SDGs and an initiative that comes out of it. But it's not only the American Planning Association who got us to support this. We put together a great set of leadership thinkers to create the advisory board and say, all right, let's move on with Planning 2050. What do we want this to be really? Because this is like a year-old initiative, right? And so we got together thinkers from or leaders from diverse multidisciplinary backgrounds, planners mainly, but also landscape architects. We got the American Institute of Architects, the International Federation of Landscape Architects, green building officials or green building experts. The U.S. Green Building Council is part of this, the Congress for New Urbanism, but also ISOCARP, the Commonwealth Association of Planners, and the Institute of Sustainable Infrastructure, which is kind of like the civil engineering side brain of the urban planning profession. And so with this multidisciplinary thinking, we started defining what Planning 2050 was going to be. And we ended up doing this intentionally to say that with Planning 2050, cities and communities will ensure critical systems. These two words, critical systems, is very, very important in our intention. They will be carbon neutral by 2050, resilient by 2050, and equitable by 2050. So we're talking about really action on systems through actional commitments, where we ended up branding as leases and LIRAs. And I'm going to go into this in a few minutes, because if you think about the systems theory, Ed was kind of like introducing this idea of, we got impact on so many systems. There's other systems that we cannot impact. And the whole idea comes to this, that everything is really interconnected. If you think about this analogy of the graphite and the diamond, the analogy says that these two elements are actually exactly the same. And if you think about it, they're actually exactly the same. They're both carbon atoms. The only difference that makes the final product is how those carbon atoms hold hands. And so if you bring that analogy to the systems thinking, to the city level type of thing, you have this systems, like environmental systems, health systems, demographic systems, socioeconomics, drainage systems, transportation systems. Those are the atoms of the cities. But how they interconnect to each other is how successful the city is. How either a diamond or a graphite is the city, right? So we like focusing on, as in Planning 2050 framework, we like focusing on that system substructure, not the systems itself, but how the systems interrelate to each other, how that structure is actually bonding to create or generate a successful city. That's what we call the substructure, the bond, the action itself, how policies, how urban action really makes this work. And those actions, we name them as LISAs or LIRAs. This is what I was introducing early on. The large impact scalable action, something that can be scaled from small to big or from big to small, or the replicable action, something that is being used in one place that can be definitely relevant and reused in another place. So LISAs and LIRAs, those are the main objective for Planning 2050. We want to create a database of LISAs and LIRAs. And what is different about LISAs and LIRAs is the future of planning. As I kind of introduce this idea, is that the planners today operate in the past and the present, maybe a little bit on the future. The planning profession is inherently a futuristic profession that we should be using the future a lot more to plan in the present. And so planners are great putting together goals and a strategy and plans in general, climate action plans, comprehensive plans, and all this. The actions that come out of these plans might not be effective in the long term, might be a one-time action that really doesn't have a future consequence, a future positive consequence. And that's what Planning 2050 is trying really to do with LISAs and LIRAs, which are what we consider actionable commitments when these LISAs and LIRAs are proven to be successful, proven to be creating diamond cities, if you want to call them that way. So Planning 2050 really encourages that continuous reporting and monitoring of actionable commitments. We're creating a dashboard for cities and communities to go into the sign on their own commitments, to track their progress, to see if those LISAs and LIRAs are actually a successful thing. And so what we end up doing with this is generating a network, a database of things that can be scaled and replicated, that can be used. When we have this huge amount of data, we can start clustering with algorithms and artificial intelligence to be able for these networks of cities and communities to adapt rapidly and react into the challenges that are, with climate change a lot more frequent. And so I'm going to leave it there, but that was the quick introduction on Planning 2050, and I think we can go to the next speaker.
Wonderful. Thank you, Julio, so much. We're on track with time, so we're doing really great with that. I will now ask Wafa to start her presentation. Great. Wafa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tijana. And my apologies for my voice. I have some health issues, so I hope everyone can hear me. And Piyush or Mark, thank you for taking the presentations over. Next slide, please. So I'll be presenting the case study from the Middle East. Julio and Ed were talking about the technologies used in urban planning and planning the cities across the world. So for that one, I'm going to present some examples from the Middle Eastern countries. Next slide, please. So from that, we have some countries in the Middle East has joined the designs of smart cities lately. We are not on the first track with other mega cities across the world, right, such as Singapore and New York and other big cities. Middle Eastern countries has joined the track on smart cities lately. But they've been doing quite good, and we can see here we have a number of countries that have been making progress in applying smart cities in their mega cities or metropolitan cities or areas. We have United Arab Emirates, we have Saudi Arabia, and other countries with the ranking between 2019 and 2023. How they were ranked based on using technologies in their urban setting with mega cities. Next slide, please. So for that in the Middle East, and I think that's the case across the other countries, there are key elements for smart cities. As Julio and Ed were talking, that we have we plan for future, and we have to do social equity, resilience, climate change, centering people, and also positioning the data and environment at the heart of our design. So an integrated physical infrastructure is a necessity for having the smart cities, data centers, applications for large data collection needs to be there, analyticals to drive actionable insights for decision making, and data feedback mechanism for ongoing process event, and flexibility to meet both current and future requirements for cities. And we have in Saudi Arabia, there is the vision of 2030 that is focusing on diversifying economic resources in the Saudi Arabia rather than just relying on oil. So they're trying through that vision of 2030 to diversify their economy by having the launch of mega cities. And we will talk later on about that in the presentation. In the United Arab Emirates, they have the Master City in 2006. And in Egypt in 2015, they launched the new administrative capital in Cairo. Next slide, please. So this, the key component for the smart cities, it should be efficiency, people, sustainability, and security for Middle Eastern countries and also for other countries as well. We have to have like smart healthcare, smart education, smart buildings, smart mobility, smart environment, safety and security, e-government, and smart tourism. Next slide, please. And the map, roadmap, of course, when applying any of these platforms or technologies, planning process, tools for smart cities, it's a long process. It's not just overnight, it can happen. So we need to have a roadmap. And this roadmap includes the long-term plan, technology to improve the quality of life, and have the collaboration between mayors and governments. Then we will have the organizational change. There should be some organizational change within the policies, and also the horizontal and vertical changes within the government itself, so they can focus on the smart cities and how they can get the goals achieved by the end of the plan they have for their country. we have the example here, the Saudi Arabia for the 2030. And then the legal framework, then we have the ensure the sustainability as a main goal for any smart cities. There should be a sustainable goal in there. And collaboration, then we go to scaling evolution towards the cost, and also we need to have an open data for transparency at the end. Next slide, please. We have in Saudi Arabia, as an example, as I mentioned in the beginning, 5 ambitious projects. The 5 mega project, what they call it, 5 mega projects in Saudi Arabia, they are designed to create new ecosystems and unlock new sectors that are heavily enabled by promoting technology and knowledge in Saudi Arabia. The giga projects are designed to economically benefit vast majority of people in Saudi Arabia beyond the real estate infrastructures. Next slide, please. We have NEOM. NEOM is one of the biggest projects that in Saudi Arabia, and it has the vision for diversifying economy. The cost is $500 billion, and its ecosystem, it's there, and it's developing in line of ambitious first phase slotted for comprehension by 2025, and for development engaged by 2030. Next slide, please. Amala is another project also. It's under development, luxury tourism destination in Saudi Arabia, and offers I'm sorry. I think it's about the time now, and I think the next slides are also some examples. Next slide, please. We have Arcadia also, that's another project for entertainment, and also some information is about the size and what it offers to diversify the economy in Saudi Arabia. Ultimately, the aim is to be a key contributor to the tourism industry, and also a magnet for both local and international visitors while diversifying the economy in Saudi Arabia. Next slide, please. The Red Sea project, also one of the big mega projects in Saudi Arabia. It's planning to focus on sustainability, incorporating eco-friendly technologies and practices, conserve natural resources and beauty of the region. Next slide, please. And we have Diriyah Gate, and this is a heritage development project located in Diriyah, Saudi Arabia. Preserve highlighting the cultural historical significance of the area itself, and it's also contributing to diversifying the economy in Saudi Arabia, promoting cultural and historical assets of Saudi Arabia to the world. I think that's all for Middle Eastern, and we will go to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Wafa. So our next speaker will be Piyush.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you so much, Tijana. First of all, at the outset, let me thank ISOCARP for giving us the opportunity to present our work, and also to give platform to the International Metropolitan Fellowship. I would be speaking about the case study of India, adhering to the topic of future of planning. First of all, of course, at the outset, let me mention that in India, the process of planning is very complex as our population size and also the area of the country. There are multiple scales of governance, and also the jurisdictions and also other interdependence related issues are very much complex. However, various factors such as constitutionally decentralized format of planning, be it at the central level, state level, local level, and these days at the regional level, has been making our lives easier. And also the interventions from the cutting edge technology are also helping us. These cutting edge technologies, of course, include Internet of Things, machine learning, drones, and other planning processes that indulge into, like I said, the cutting edge technologies. If we look at the current metropolitan planning landscape in India, the traditional planning methods include preparations of plans, wider public consultations, and also resource allocation according to the public consultations that are held. These often are a result of intra-metropolitan negotiations between various municipal entities, be it the municipal corporations, municipal units, or even the sometimes village heads. The processes come with their own challenges and limitations. There is no real-time data, there is inefficiency and inefficacy in the process due to certain local aspirations, of course, also the outdated norms, and that basically leads to slower progress onto implementation part. This calls very much for the need of change. This change, it should be seen in terms of data-driven decision making, stronger metropolitan aspirations rather than just the local aspirations, and a paradigm shift in the norms that are already in place. The figure here shows typical metropolitan plan of the city of Hyderabad, which lies in the eastern part of the technologies and platforms, which is of course the title of today's theme. If you speak specifically about technologies, there are various emerging technologies at service in the planning processes. This includes the latest addition of artificial intelligence, the prevailing GIS, the Internet of Things in the smart city projects in India, the big data and machine learning also in place, of course, at a very minuscule scale. The plans and decisions are now becoming more and more decisive, examples of which I would, of course, deliberate in next coming slides. The data-driven and effective resource allocation is also taking place through, such as initiatives that cater to land suitability, network analysis, and land use land cover simulations using various methods such as cellular automata or Markov chains. More and more emphasis now is on to developing citizen-oriented portals, dashboards, and applications wherein citizens are given a platform to interact about the issues they face and convey them to the metropolitan area authorities. The success and the failures of these initiatives are, of course, a matter of debate, which we won't be going through into because I'm just here to introduce the things. The tools that are being used are predominantly three, according to me. In India, we have been giving an emphasis on dashboards, wherein real-time data is showcased in interactive format, and the citizens are able to understand the whereabouts of their metropolitan areas from different disciplines on these dashboards. The other tool is portals, wherein the intra-governmental decision-making and monitoring of the projects is going on. For example, these portals were very helpful for various metropolitan authorities during the time of COVID-19. The other part is mobile applications, which is typically a project under every smart city project. This is, of course, expanding to the metropolitan areas where these applications are downloaded on cell phones. Issues and grievances are mentioned on these applications by the citizens. Very few of the cities, although, have these mobile applications that cater to the wider audience. First example of a regional or metropolitan cutting-edge technology intervention, which was introduced by the government of India in a very fresh approach, that is the Gati Shakti portal. Gati Shakti word comes from Sanskrit, the oldest language, and also Hindi, which is the predominant language in India. Gati means pace and Shakti means power or conviction. So the confluence of pace and power is actually going to drive the integrated regional development of India. The Prime Minister introduced this scheme very recently aimed at the Regional Infrastructure Development Initiative. This is supposed to create a portal for all the government agencies. As I mentioned in the beginning of my slide, India is a very complex system. There are so many government departments, and they often lack the basic thing called dialogue when they are functioning. So the portal facilitates a dialogue between the government entities as to map their resources and their plans on a single portal, so that the other department is in the know of it when it is planning for something to deliberate on them. This is a GIS-enabled portal, and it is aims at creating a national master plan with a national database. The significance, as I mentioned, is about cutting the intra-governmental clashes and to provide a technological intervention towards the holistic planning of different metropolitan regions in India. The portal is in development phases and would be made accessible to public very soon, according to certain media reports. The other example at the city scale or the metropolitan scale is the integrated command and control centers. These ICCs have been deployed in various cities under the Smart Cities Mission program of the Indian government. These ICCs are established basically to enhance metropolitan management in real time, also to enhance public safety and response towards natural disasters. The real-time data integration is made through sources such as CCTV cameras, sensors, and other IoT devices. This provides support to the decision-making to various authorities involved in metropolitan affairs, and this has been proven to be useful in various emergency responses, especially in the times of COVID-19 or maybe in the times of urban floods with which the Indian cities are caught up. This also has been trying to improve various public services such as traffic management, public utilities, and waste management. These ICCCs have been successfully implemented in various Indian cities such as Mumbai, Chennai, Kolkata, and other 50 plus cities. With this, I would like to conclude on the Indian part. And again, thank you so much to the ISOCARP and my fellow panelists for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Piyush. You have really reflected on quite a challenging issue, putting this into a perspective of metropolitan scale. Thank you for your Mark. The floor is yours.
Hi. So good evening. I hope you can hear me. Okay.
We can hear you.
Okay, so I'm Mark De Castro from. Good evening from the Philippines. First of all, thank you again from ISOCARP for allowing us to present. I am the Austronesia Chapter lead, so I'll be sharing about the perspective. So the Austronesia is actually the island chapter of the IMF. It's the most diverse in terms of language and culture. So it includes the Southeast Asian countries such as the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and other archipelagic nations in the Pacific. So the focus on my presentation will be the digital, I feel are the digital elements, the metro digital elements, and case studies on Singapore and Metro Manila on what we are doing in terms of planning using the digital technologies. Next slide, please. So I'll start with the context of where we are, and then I'll quickly go into the lessons from the pandemic, and then I highlight quickly the technology tool and the process, and then it close with the waves of innovation where we might be going planning 2050. Next slide, please. Okay, so I saw this slide earlier during the panel. This just hits me personally because I'm from the Philippines and we were hit by one of the strongest typhoon to make landfall, which is Haiyan. So this is not just COVID, so we have recession and climate change. So this is very visual for us, especially with the archipelagic nations. And I think technology will really be important in how to address these coming waves of change. Next slide, please. So just to set the scale, Metro Manila and Singapore are actually almost the same size as also with Toronto. But the major difference is we have double the population. We have 15 million. So imagine the challenges of Metro Manila. Next slide, please. So Metro Manila is composed of 17 cities. So we have 17 mayors. We call it 17 kingdoms. So these mayors make different decisions based on their jurisdiction. So the map on the left, the image on the left, as you can see, is the open source street map that was very, very useful during the pandemic. That's why it was very useful for mayors as a tool to see the big picture. And it sort of attempted to break silos between the mayors because it's evidence-based data. On the right, you can see the actual situation on the ground. So combining both image is really a powerful visualization for us planners. Combination of the top level and then the ground. Next slide, please. So I really resonate with this analogy of Pedro Ortiz using the submarine, the different compartments, because in Metro Manila, as I mentioned, we have 17 municipalities, and the picture on the right actually shows you an actual meeting that the mayors were conducting right in the middle of the pandemic, and they were each thinking about how to lock in to protect their own jurisdiction. So it's like submarine attempting not to have the water come in this instance, the virus to spread. Next slide, please. So that's why I really highlight the the first one, the technology, it plays a critical role. So an example is the digital twin. So Singapore has been doing this since 2012. They did the aerial mapping, the ground. So they put together an open source platform. So the way I differentiate digital twin, it's a combination of GIS, AutoCAD, and BIM, building information modeling. So it's real time. So similar to what we did in the OpenStreetMap, we are able to see at not just building level, but at the city level, how real-time situations are happening through sensors, through way of capturing data. Next slide, please. So the next one is the tool. So this one is what we are actually utilizing with the IMF. We partnered with this company, the startup is Digital Blue Foam. So this platform is very useful because it actually simulates the 15-minute what are the immediate critical facilities. So it also models carbon emission. So it's very useful in terms of applying it to different at neighborhood level. Next slide, please. So the other one, the most important, I feel, the process. So we at IMF, Austronesia Chapter, we have developed this sort of event or workshop. We call it the Metro Hackathon. So it's a combination. If you're familiar with technology, tech hackathons, so the idea is to combine the unique process of focusing on one specific problem and then linking it with how to define problems at metro level. So also our experience also with conducting this event is it's a way to break silos. So you can see the picture. You have the private developer, you have the national level, you have the community builder, city planner, all in one room. Even the lawmaker. So we had the event started with the technical aspect of it. So the city planner was presenting the directions of the city. And then the private developer was coming in, was really interested on what are the plans of the city. And then later on, a stakeholder, a community builder, he has a community of creatives, was really interested how to engage the city. But then the lawmaker came in to also share what the laws are being drafted for the city. So you blend all of these things together with data, with digital tools. The main takeaway here is really the value of allowing people to share same room, same time, define objective and define tool, and then you come up with so actually next in November we'll be coming up with our another hackathon. We have been piloting already on the ground the specific community or initiative that we hope to push forward. Next slide, please. So this is, I think, a very relevant tool. We keep on talking about technology, but the best technology and processes will amount to nothing if people are not willing to work together. I've seen this so much. I've been at national level, local level, private level, the different agenda, whatever technology you really have, it's difficult so I think that the value of the technology is really to break silos because you can share technology, the data, hard data. Next slide, please. So just very quickly, just to set the context, I got this from Arkinvest, a global research firm on the future technology. So we are in very exciting times. According to the research, the combination of blockchain, AI, robotics, and all of the technologies are 5 times compared to you have the steam engine, the first wave, steam engine railways, and then you have the telephone, automobile electricity on the second wave, and then you have the computers, internet on the third wave. So imagine the 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 technology, the technological change, what we have, what is in story for us in the next 5-10 years. So we also believe from IMF, it's the age of metropolis. So this will align with the evolution of planning, and we have to look, especially 70% of population will be urban. So that will not be just concentrating on cities. That will be really it's going to be metropolitan discussions. Next slide, please. So just like to share also this postcard from the future. Midjourney is a very, very useful AI generating tool. Imagine AI can already envision the future. In 5 minutes, you have a, this is really mind blowing because in architecture, we used to do this for 2 months. AI does this in 5 minutes. So, and they can generate as many as you want. No? Next slide, please. So I'd like to close with what we're doing with the IMF. So all of these initiatives here, it's really, I think the beauty of IMF, it shows us the different perspectives we're able to learn. So we have the different chapters. We're 2 years old. We have 200 metro planners all over the world, and we really appreciate ISOCARP for giving us this opportunity. And we are planning to have our Congress in November also, so hope we can invite you guys. So yeah, I hope I'm within my time, and thank you everyone.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was wonderful. Thank you all for sharing your very diverse and different perspectives. You all come from different backgrounds. You've shared many different tools and projects and aspirations within your fields of work. So my question would be, from your perspective and respective backgrounds and experiences, what are the main advantages and challenges in utilizing new platforms, technologies, and methodologies in the planning practice? Maybe we can find a common issue within all these different regions. Is there anybody? Ed, go ahead. You would just have to unmute, please. We don't hear you.
Sorry, I've got a button to unmute the microphone, but it doesn't seem to work. I think there's a really interesting conversation around technology, and if you use the example of self-driving cars, the whole thing about how you integrate the new technology in a complex system. Self-driving cars are a really good example. You can get them to work in a closed environment where you don't have unpredictable things happening. I don't know if anybody heard, there was a podcast a couple of years ago, which was called I Love You Waymo, and it was talking about using the Google self-driving car, people driving around in it. It was Malcolm Gladwell. What was really interesting was it was engineered so that it would avoid collisions. One of the kind of secondary impacts of that is that actually, if you have cars that will do anything to avoid a collision, you can step out anywhere that you want in a city. So that suddenly means you don't need crossings, you don't have to worry about kids. It could be amazing. It could mean that you have cities which are really people-friendly, but at the same time, they're completely gridlocked for cars. So as a response, I think there was a proposal for somewhere like Manhattan, where they proposed a completely separate network for self-driving cars. And it sounds okay, but if you go back to the 1960s, that's what people were proposing, and they were doing in real cities. They were separating the infrastructure for cars from the infrastructure of cities, which is streets. It broke apart really dense pedestrian networks. It made it really difficult to move across the city. And it created a whole load of negative impacts. And I think that is the real challenge, is that cities have emerged and developed and evolved over hundreds of years, and they've evolved around the needs of people, and they've evolved so that they bring people together who don't necessarily know each other already. They create opportunities for interaction. It might be that you can trade with somebody, but you can each keep your own social background. You might not change your social values, but you can do something. You could, trading is an example. It might be exchanging knowledge, it might be other things. And I think the risk of new technology is that it's really easy to see these opportunities of new technology and to forget all the things that make cities good. And I think the real value of cities is to bring people together in a way that works for people. The risk of technology is that we forget that. We focus on really you can use clever technology to overcome bad design, and that makes a city makes it much less resilient, because what happens if something happens to the technology? So I think for me the question is, let's use technology, but let's use it to learn why cities work for people, so that we can design them to be really resilient. So you can walk around them, you can cycle around them, you could drive around them, but it shouldn't just be for one of those.
Mm-hmm. And I want to add to that, Ed, that you're mentioning the learning of it, right? And the continuous learning of it, because we might do things that have unintended consequences we don't know, right, in the future especially. And so that continuous learning and continuous adaptation very rapidly is so important for the future of planning. I mean, I feel like in our profession is just starting to scratch the surface on great technologies, artificial intelligence. We're living these exciting times, like Mark was mentioning. And so for the Planning 2050 initiative, the platform that we're created is generating this database of cities and communities actions that are continuously monitored. And so they do this on a continuous basis, very intentionally. The future aspiration for Planning 2050 is that these actions are, once collected, we can start clustering by types, by systems, by success rate, by side effects and benefits and unintentional consequences. So we can actually track this, monitor, adapt, change as we need it. So the use of machine learning, artificial intelligence, all these things that we're just starting to scratch the surface is something that we have in our future framework, and it's very, very intentionally. So the challenge for us is to gather as much as possible, as diverse as possible, but at the rate that we're moving, it seems that the challenge won't be too hard, because technology is just really allowing us to connect bigger networks, international fellows like you guys, and we're going to be all connected to make this possible. Just wanted to add that.
Just like to follow through, and if I may, just like to follow through on what
Yes.
William mentioned. Yeah, so I also see technology, the value of it as breaking silos. It's really challenging. For example, as I mentioned earlier, we have different mayors from Metro Manila and different agenda. One of the impacts of, or the usefulness of the technology, each mayor, of course, wants their city to be to do this, to have this development, or of course the one on top. But I think what the technology is able to show is hardcore data, evidence-based. It shows mayors their actual situation, and it can align agenda. So that was the case in when we were doing the Metro Hackathon in Cebu. There were also different mayors, and we were designing the green loop. It will connect the 3 cities in Cebu. So each mayor wanted to have the key development in their area, but through the tool, the digital, the blue form that we showed to them, it actually generated some of the information. Then it allowed them to make decisions, not based on their personal agenda. Just wanted to share that.
That's a very great point. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, the local authority interest often comes as as a hindrance to no matter what good technology or methodologies you have to know how to handle the stakeholders involved as well. So I'll move on to my next question. Oh, sorry, Wafa, you have raised your hand. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Was impressed with technologies and how much it can do for cities and for everyone at individual levels as well. So planning for smart cities, and we have the challenge of, like, we are talking now about Middle Eastern countries, and we are talking about total different 3 components, like more stable countries, which is like the Gulf countries, and less stable countries, which are countries that are going through conflict and also disasters and all that. So there is disparities between all these countries. Using technology is a little bit challenging for the environment, that where are we planning to use these technologies, which region, which environment, and which culture that we are embedding these technologies into. Planners, they can plan and they can dream and they can do things. Again, involvement of people is very important, and convincing them to do that is very important as well. The skill gap and the cultural and social barriers plays a big role in a region like a Middle Eastern region. I think some other barriers can be applied, but we have a promising, vision for the future that we are planning for future, not for today. Thank you, Tijana.
Thank you, Wafa. Thank you for sharing your insight as well. I will ask the audience now, because we have a limited amount of time left, if they have any questions. I know we have 2 sessions now at the same time, so our general audience is divided currently, but I'm sure that our registered participants of the Congress will have the opportunity to see this recording afterwards. So I encourage anyone to ask the questions and collaborate in this fruitful discussion. While you think about that, I will pose the next one to our panelists, which is how the varying timeframes for urban interventions, for impact assessments, for technology adoption align with the urgent timelines for climate change mitigation and our net zero goals. Do we need a new planning model? What do you think? Yes, Julio, go ahead.
I'll go ahead. I don't have, this is a great question. I don't have I would say the perfect answer for it, but more like new planning models. I personally believe that we need to start thinking about the future of our profession. And as I mentioned when I was presenting this, I think the planning profession is inherently about the future. So we should be using the future to plan, not the present, not the past. How do we do this? How do we see the future? With technologies, with algorithms, with predictions. If we don't do that, we'll be just naturally too late when the plans are implemented to actually fix or to actually bring the solutions, right? So that's my kind of like 2 cents, trying to really highlight what we should be doing, planning for the future. And so my question more is, or will be, how do planners apply the plans in the future with continuous adaptation to new challenges? Because that's what is coming nowadays, right? We have all this extra high risk of crazy disasters or things that are coming unexpectedly, but they're coming more frequently. And so part of it is data and predictions and algorithms, like I mentioned, but most importantly is continuous action. Like I mentioned before in the previous question, that we need to start learning, monitoring, adapting really quickly. With Planning 2050, I believe we're touching on all those points, and we're making sure that our planning profession really stays relevant.
Absolutely,
Sorry.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And I think this setting right now is one of these learning experiences and opportunities to really get out of the standard framework and our national boundaries that we're in, and exchange our knowledge and further our agendas by having an insight globally and exchanging the ideas from all diverse backgrounds like we're doing right now. I think Piyush raised his hand first, so please, Piyush, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dr. Tijana. To answer your first question, whether the time frames align, the plain answer is no. I could go on and on, but we all understand the context. But I would be more interested in answering the second part of the question about the changes in planning model. Coming from a globally south country and recently a very the most populous country in the world, India, I would definitely vouch for a change in the planning models. And that is in terms of understanding that the era of urbanization is over. The era of regionalization has started. The cities have become metropolises. So the very way of looking at cities is not urban anymore, at least in the context of various developing countries like India. The way of looking at them may be metropolitan or regional, and that's how we can probably place the planning models. The other thing that I think in this regard is that various initiatives, causes, and approaches from these globally south countries need a helping hand, or a extension of probably better ideas from those who have succeeded. So it is probably the duty of platforms like ISOCARP, which they are dutifully doing as well, to provide the various cities from globally south countries with hand-holding, maybe transfer of knowledge, or more and more funded projects wherein we also learn and you also learn.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you, Piyush. I think Mark was next, and then Ed. Please go ahead, Mark.
Yes, thank you. The second question actually reminds me of the plenary earlier, the capacity to disrupt current systems. So it's difficult to say we need new ways of planning when in fact in reality, for example, in the Philippines, um, we've had a long history of different colonial uh, culture coming into us. You have the Spanish, 300 years. You have Japan. You have the US. So all of these are embedded in our current systems, in our codes, in our national, all the way to the local, to barangay level. So it's that relates to the timeline. So imagine embedding that 300 years of habit and break that in the next 20 years. I don't I don't think that's realistic because just having the Congress decide on changing just simply updating our national building code. It's been taking us 20 years to do that, and the building code right now gives us directions on the planning, the parking minimums. And so I think what we need is to train the younger generation. The key is to plant to them the ideas, these new ideas, so that we have a chance. It may not take 20 years, 30 years, but hopefully 50 years or 100 years. There's hope, but I don't see it happening really realistically in the next 10 years unless something drastic happens. Just my insight.
Thank you, Mark. But I'm remain hopeful, and as the graph that you showed, then with this really high spike in the utilization of newer generations with the IoT, with the new technology, I think we're heading towards a community, a global village that we just exchange skills, knowledge, and everything much faster. So I'm a hopeful optimist in that regard. Ed, please go ahead.
So there's lots of things that are really interesting. I think one of the really interesting things is this mindset around growth, and if we need different models. I think probably if you look at the last 100 years, it's been unusual in the amount of growth, and what that has meant in terms of planning has been making new things and extending things. There's some really interesting books. There's a book called Slow Down by a guy I think called Danny Dorling, who looks at how global population is going to stop growing by the end of this century. As soon as you realize that population is going to start growing, it has a whole series of implications on cities. So we're extending cities in a certain way. What if these cities are going to be underpopulated? Would we have designed them the same way? There's going to be a whole load of impacts from climate change, people shifting around, all sorts of things around that. But I think this really key point for me is how long it takes to do things in cities. If you look at Masdar is relatively small, but is still, compared to the phase, I can't remember what phase, the big square and the small square that were the original proposal in the mid-2000s, they're still incomplete. And that's partly because these wider systems around finance and economy are changing and have meant it's changed, and it hasn't been built out the way that it was expected. So, I mean, I think there's something which is, it takes a long time to change a city or to build bits. There's so much carbon embodied and embedded in the materials that are already in cities. I think we have to be really careful. And I think what this means is that we have to make best use of what's already there. We can't keep planning a new thing, which is the latest answer to something. We have to make the best use of what's there. And that means being really good at understanding the systems which are there, analyzing the systems which are there, and understanding what opportunities that creates and what constraints they impose, and how to overcome them. So I think there's something about reframing it. It shouldn't be just about continually thinking about new growth. There is that pressure in some places, but that might have gone in 20 years or 30 years. By the time the cities have been built out, there'll be a different set of questions and problems that they're having to come to grips with. But for me, I think it's really about understanding what you have and making best use of what's already there, trying to make what's already there resilient.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Ed. And, you know, some cities are thinking about implementing or already going ahead with the retrofit first strategies, or just thinking more towards post-growth or degrowth dynamic in economical sense. And that also speaks to your point of, you know, population rise. So Wafa raised her hand. Wafa, go ahead, please.
We will need in the future, if future planners will adapt that. kind of parallel process with planning, adopting technology, inclusive planning, all work together to make cities more, adaptable for future with technologies. They are smart for people, they're smart for environment, they're smart for the needs of people who are living in this. The parallel process is very important. So we didn't have that gap in skills. We didn't have that gaps in catching up with urbanization problems that we all face in different at different levels in different countries and different cities. And this going to be kind of a complex and kind of a, I would say, challenging process, but step by step planning practices can make a change, as we know, and all these technologies and these new methods for improving planning for megacities are there in hands of new planners who are going to lead the future. We are leading the future now, but other planners who are going to come after us, they will lead the future after us. But they need also to think more creatively, innovatively, so they can target the real problems at the real time, utilizing what they have in their hands, but everything needs to be in parallel. Not to forget the community, not to forget the, all marginalized groups within the community. You need to include everyone in there while, making smart decisions, I would say. Make smart decisions for smart cities.
Absolutely. Thank you, Wafa. Great point. I will once again ask the audience if there are any questions they would like to pose to the panelists and involve in the conversation. If not, we are 10 minutes after our deadline, so I would like to thank all our panelists. This was amazing. I personally could stay an hour longer and discuss this with you because it's a really interesting topic and your perspectives are so valuable. And but of course, I want to be mindful to your time. So if there are no audience questions at this point, I think we can wrap it up. Oh, okay. We have Emily's mentioning cameras open for a group photo, please. So can all the attendees just open your cameras? All right. Thank you. Emily, are we set?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, Ishmael here is opening too. Can you do it one more time, please? Nasim? Okay, I think we're good. Well, thank you, everyone. This was a wonderful discussion. Have a wonderful rest of your day or your evening or your morning, depending on where you are. And thank you once again.
Thank you, Tijana.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much and namaste. Bye-bye.
Bye. Emily, just one quick question, sorry, before you leave. This will be available for the attendees, right? The recording?
Yes, it will be.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye-bye.